Hello, everyone. Happy to have you here for today's Our Whole Lives Taking Flight webinar. I am Dr. Melanie Davis. I am the Our Whole Lives Program Manager for the Unitarian Universalist Association. Reverend Amy Johnson, my OWL colleague from the United Church of Christ, is not with us today, but I am happy to be here with Andrea Burse, who is providing technical support for us, and our special guest, Dr. Tanya Bass. Dr. Bass is an award-winning sexuality educator and expert in health equity and sexual health. She is a graduate of North Carolina Central University's Department of Public Health Education and of the Graduate School of Widener University's Center for Human Sexuality Studies. She is the lead instructor for the human sexuality at North Carolina Central University and is the founder of the North Carolina Sexual Health Conference. We're going to be giving you a link in the chat if you'd like to attend that at the end of October. She is an Our Whole Lives facilitator, trainer, and also does trainings for community-based organizations, churches, academic institutions, and state and national organizations. Dr. Bass is on the editorial board of the American Journal of Sexuality Education, and she has published in peer-reviewed texts and journals. She is the co-author of Noni Talks About Race, which is part of a series of books for children and youth by Dr. Mary Jo Podgorski, and she has contributed to several Our Whole Lives projects. This is her second visit to OWL Taking Flight. The first time she shared about the importance of ongoing education for sexuality educators. And today we're going to be discussing what it's like to provide sex ed in the south of the US. So welcome, Dr. Tanya Bass.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Happy to have you here. I'd like to just start by putting some context into this because when we started producing Our Whole Lives 25 years ago, circumstances were a lot different in the United States and Canada. And certainly the climate has changed over the years, especially in some of our more conservative communities and states. But whether we see sexuality education as a mandate or a ministry or a mission, it is an act of love and hope, um, resilience in many cases, and defiance, because there are people who would shut us down from doing this really important work. So I'm really happy that you're here today to discuss what it's like to be doing this work in some more challenging environments. We do have our program coordinators and facilitators who have expressed concerns about, what's going to happen to their churches or congregations, what's going to happen to them. So I'd like to start by asking what is some, or not just one, but what are some of the bigger challenges that you face as a sexuality educator in the South?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I feel like it's something I've had to grapple with even before I probably considered myself a sexuality educator. And I think some of the biggest challenges are more about personal perception, if that makes sense. So I started my career in HIV prevention and having had to write a curriculum for persons of lived experience with HIV to become peer educators. It was during implementing the actual curriculum in a residential space that I really started hearing externally from not those in the program, but in my community who didn't, even as kind, nice people, didn't have positive things to say about my work, about the people that I worked with. Also about the shame or the stigma around pleasure, around owning and walking in your true sexuality and even exploring it. And so I think a lot of the challenges have to deal with not only colonization, but the socialization around sex, the shame, the cultural norms, as well as who gets to have sex and the sexualization of Black and Brown bodies specifically.
Mhm.
in the South. And I think being a Black femme also working in this space has compounded some of those challenges of not gaining support.
Mm,
But I will say, and I know you didn't ask this, but in contrast to that, is that some of that work or some of my identity has helped fulfill some of the positive work in sexuality in North Carolina or in the South in general. If you look at some of the professionals who are doing this work directly in community, a lot of those folks look like the community that they're actually serving. So they're
mhm.
probably experiencing some of the same challenges, but I think the flip side and the good thing is that we're serving community as community and we're doing it well. The last thing I will say is the lack of training sometimes. Um, a lot of the sex ed um, in our profession, and especially in the South, is a lens of K-12. So, like, sex
Mhm.
is only for the young. And that's why I love OWL so much. It goes across the lifespan. And so I think if you don't get, you're not able to often get quality sex ed in the South in K-12. That in turn brings adults who've had limited knowledge and experience with sex and sexuality who it's like a perpetual cycle
Sure.
of not learning about things, and that's why I love this work a little bit because I want to be a liberatory resource for the adults who didn't get the sex ed that they had in school.
Yeah. And it is important because, a lot of the work that we do in supporting parents as sexuality educators is around giving them the tools so that they're not passing along misinformation or stigma and shame that you referred to earlier. Yeah. Do you find that it helps to have all the training and education that you have, or is that kind of looked at as not necessary? I'm just wondering because you are highly trained in this work, certified, graduate, all the things.
I mean, I think it has its benefits. I think it allows me, like when we talk about NC we say it's professional development for professionals or sex ed for professionals. And I think it has benefited me because coming from a public health lens on top of that, a lot of the sex ed provided in the South is through that public health lens because that's also driven by funding. And so I think it is important to have some level of expertise or training in that way. I've seen, and I don't think I started out this way, but I've seen where individuals who would do sexuality education utilizing an evidence-based curriculum or some other curriculum, the only sex ed they have is going through a training of trainers or a trainer of facilitators where they get to implement the curriculum. So if there are questions outside of the curriculum resources, they're not always equipped to answer them.
Right.
And so I think it is a hand in hand. Do you need to be certified? Not necessarily. Do you need to have a terminal degree or a master's level degree? No, but I think you need a level of professional development to have that confidence, have that level of comfort, and just even resources to allow you to educate effectively.
Actually, that there was earlier a link, I think, in the chat to the first Owl Taking Flight that you did, which was about the need for professional development well, let's call it continuing education, because if you're an owl facilitator, you're not necessarily a professional sex educator, but that continuing education is important. And folks should know that's what your dissertation was about, right? The need for people to keep learning. Even if people have taken, I mentioned that you're an owl trainer, facilitator trainer now. Um, it is good to keep that learning going because the facilitator training shouldn't be seen as a once and done kind of thing. We need to keep reading the news and looking at sources. Can't necessarily rely on the CDC anymore. So understanding where those reliable sources are for answering questions that youth might have in the question box, or any OWL participant might have in the question box.
Right.
Um, so when you're thinking about, you mentioned your community, but now we're also thinking about legal issues that might come into play. So, what are some of the risks that you face in the various settings that you work in when you're talking about issues like LGBTQIA, contraception, reproductive choice? What are some of the risks that you face, or you and
think
others?
I think all of us, probably nationally, but specifically in the South, where we face termination. Using terms like inclusivity, diversity, what was it, pleasure, even it was pleasure and intimacy, most recently, that kind of came up in a workshop description as being flagged, for not passing the new salt test, I guess, whatever you call it, in terms of language. And that's sad. Like that, like I know Al also looks at the circles of sexuality. That's a whole circle. Like
Hmm.
that we have to call it something else, or playing that word game. And I think public health educators or public health professionals, sexuality professionals, we've always played the word game so that we can get into space. But now it's like on taking on a whole new level. So I think the biggest risk is termination for any one in the South. And what's sad and unfortunate, when I think about termination in my colleagues, a lot of that goes back. Remember early when I said the personal, like sometimes if you don't fit, what do I want to call it? The not even a status quo, because that's not the word I'm looking for, but like when you think about identity, if you don't fit being cis, het, or whatever, your own personal life and your personal identity could get you fired.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's not a lot of opportunity. And I probably would say like in HIV prevention in the South, you would have more flexibility and opportunity to be out and open, because there's like this expectation that gay males or, trans individuals are more likely to work in that area and have a level, there's still not protection, but your job and your work would be more protected because of that identity.
Interesting.
Or a black queer woman
Yeah.
working in a school, or a black queer man, or like think about being LGBTQ identified and working with young people, especially I think about young people. That is a thing. The other thing that is at risk is, because of that, is like doxing and people attempting to harm you, or trolling you and finding your work and saying things about you on the internet. That's happened. Like I know I had my account um suspended one time on Instagram because somebody hacked into it. And that's kind of why I don't even post that much anymore, because I'm afraid like that one post is going to be the opportunity for.
Yeah. Well, we have been encouraging congregations and churches to open their doors to OWL programs and to collaborate with other community groups to offer Our Whole Lives. And one of the things that I recommend to people is that they don't put any the facilitator names. Don't You might not even want to put the name of your church on your flyer. Just have an email address for more information. Tanya used the word doxing. That's when somebody finds your private information, like your home phone number or your home address, and then puts it online for the tr- trolls to get to. So, whenever you're promoting an Our Whole Lives program, remember to limit the amount of personal information that you're putting out into the community. Um, it's a really unfortunate thing that we have to be concerned about that now, but it is real. I'm curious, when you say that you can't even use the words pleasure and intimacy, how do you promote your classes? How do you um, promote any of your workshops? What words do you use that will allow people to come in who need the information and want the information but will protect you from any of the triggering people that we don't want to necessarily trigger.
It probably turns into things that people don't want to come to or understand what we're saying, or, relational or relationships, communication, all the things that are related to intimacy without saying intimacy, which could leave for a dry description. But the other benefit is the people that, in my perspective, the people that are looking for the words aren't going to be the people to attend anyway.
Right.
Makes sense. So hearing it, the hope is that they're going to come and still know that they're going to get something that is still factual, that is still relevant. The description just doesn't cause a red flag in society, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I think, oh, somebody just said we can't even legally use pronouns in public schools in North Carolina.
Yeah, like we had some folks, and I won't say where, but in some institutions where, we all have had, well, I won't say all, people who are allies, people who have identities, and want to offer and show that we are inclusive and that we are air quotation safe space and put pronouns like even in your email address. Some of that is not even acceptable anymore.
Yeah. Well, I bet it's still acceptable to say he and she, which is the unfortunate bias, right?
Right.
So, so uh what do you think that we know that our whole lives is comprehensive, but not everybody is getting that out and about. What are some of the most pressing concerns that you're seeing among youth, children, youth, and teens that you're working with?
One of the most recent conversations that I've had with a colleague is AI, like porn, or AI chat, chatbotting, and not that I think porn has its place in our lives and in our ability to educate, but I think what has been the challenge is a level of disconnect from the human response and engagement, being able to socialize, communicate effectively, just connect, like even eye contact. Like I'm of a generation where, like, I was raised about having eye contact. You look at the person when you're speaking to you, like how you're even affirming me now by nodding your head.
Hmm.
And I've seen a decrease in eye contact and different shifts in body language, like the level of being able to connect with people and look them in the eye or look at them when they're talking. It's almost like you're not used to looking at a face, so you don't even look at a face, if that makes sense.
Do you think that that's from people, constantly having their phones in their hands, or how are you relating to that to AI, that they're watching the AR kind of at a distance as opposed to true interactions?
So I think it's two things, because if I think about young adults and youth that I have encountered most recently, I think COVID could have had an impact on connection. And I think the use of the mobile devices has had an impact. When I think about the AI conversation, it's that lack of seeking human connection and relationship, because guess what? I now can go to this site and
Mm.
have that with someone, and I'm almost in control, which also worries me about consent, because you basically don't have to seek permission in this AI reality that you're engaging with someone in, but in real life, you do. And
Yeah. I just had somebody from an Episcopal, I don't know if it was a parish or a school that she was calling from, but she wanted to know if Our Whole Lives addressed AI. And it we are mentioning it for those field testers who are using the third edition material this fall and winter. There is some mention of AI, and I found an article to send to that person that talked about the need for parents to talk to their kids about this, and I would encourage this I don't want to derail this and talk about AI too much, but for the facilitators who are listening or anybody who works with children and youth and teens, uh, I would encourage them to have conversations with the young people in their lives. And facilitators can do this as part of their support for parents as sexuality educators, is encouraging folks, how are you using the internet? Are you using Chat GPT? Are you using it for more than maybe checking your homework? You might have ethical issues with that too. But to really talk about relationships and what makes relationships so special.
Yeah.
Because I think what you're saying, and I have seen that in young adults too, who are choosing to be isolated as opposed to going out in the community and getting involved in sports or activities or just general interacting with folks. So yeah, that's good conversation to have. So so what are some of the things that you recommend for parents that are in areas where sex ed isn't as available anymore, or we know that there's some horrible sex ed being provided? So what is the antidote that you're suggesting to parents and caregivers?
Well, I think parents and caregivers do need to engage in their own sexuality education, to help them learn for themselves, but then also in that same line that the education covers um, ways to talk and strategies for talking to the kiddos in their lives. Like back in the day, I feel like back in the day, and but it was so long ago and it needs to be revised in a different way. But we have this evidence-based program called Parents Matter. And at the time I was working for our state Department of Ed and managing the program, but I also, I mean, I'm of community, facilitated it at my own church. And it's so cool because um it allowed parents to come together and talk about puberty, to talk about sex ed. And it I think it was the last or the next to last session where they actually would bring their children and practice and have open start the conversations. Like we talked about how to utilize, ooh, the word just escaped my mind. What do you call it? Teachable moments.
No.
Having a teachable moment, like you're in the car driving, no one can escape. So let's have this conversation about
Yeah.
the song on the radio or what show we were watching last night. Like it really, I think the key thing, although it's antiquated in terms of some of the content and the not the yeah some of the content and some of the resources, but the context is still relevant of capitalizing and understanding the utilization of teachable moments, understanding that you don't have a talk with your kiddo. There are multiple conversations. And so I've seen where we have had young people who have engaged in conversations early and often with their parents or trusted adults that continue to do it even in young adult life or adult life. I even
Hmm.
think about my mother, who's 83 now, and my niece. The way my mom has conversations with my niece, completely different than she had with me. And I like to pat myself on the back to be like, although she was my first sex educator, I am now her sex educator. And
Yeah.
conversations with my niece have been more affirming for my niece.
It's it's an interesting thing because I remember being that for my parents too when I started going to graduate school to study human sexuality education and with the goal of being an educator and a counselor. I remember my mom saying, "Well, people have been having sex for eons. I don't know why they need to talk to you about it." Like, well,
Uh,
bless your heart, Mom. I'm so glad that you've been able to figure out all the answers on your own, but not everybody can. And
yeah,
that's why we have adult sex education. And that's why we have parent support. I just put the link to the UU version of Parents and Caregivers as sexuality educators into the chat. And Andrea, if you could maybe add the one for the UCC version, that would be great if you have that at hand. Um, there are also, I will take a minute to do a little advertisement. We have now also these under your wing videos, um, for we started out with Under Your Wing videos for K1, grades K1, and now we also have them for um, grades, the parents of kids in grades 4 through 6.
Ooh.
And they're a little bit different now. The ones for K1 are featuring the authors of the K1 curriculum, Dorian Sola and Marshall Miller, and they talk about here's some 8 important conversations, and here are the books to use to do it. For the 4 through 6 parents, we have Amy Johnson and Kirsten Defer, who wrote the 4-6 curriculum, and they talk with OWL trainers about this, what you were just talking about, Tanya, how to get those conversations started. So they don't focus as much on the books, but more on the conversations. So I put the link there for the where you can find them on the UUA site. They're also available on the UCC site. They're the same videos and resources. And I will say that the K1 ones are captioned in Spanish. We're still waiting for the Spanish captioned versions for the 4-6. Um, so um, so let's talk some more about you talked a bit about handling resistance, the words that you have to use. But what do you do when the parents themselves are resistant to getting sex ed for their kids in the areas in which you work?
Yeah, that's been really, really tough. But we've had some strides, especially, our state is large, but not as large as Texas. And I feel like, but it it seems to we used to feel like our struggles were regional or geographic, but I think they're all across, even in our largest school district, even in other more, I guess what you would call progressive parts of the state. But the one thing that we try to do is navigate the consent process. So, especially, we want young people to get the education. And I know that some of the folks online will know about like passive consent, meaning you would send the note home or you don't send the note home. And if you don't get any requests to remove your child or give them some alternative education, then it's provided. Then that's in the K-12, like actual school settings, but it also has been beneficial for some of the programming in the community as well. I ultimately think again, if you pair conversations with parents that are meaningful, even with the passive consent, you're not going to have very many parents come up and say, I don't want my child to learn how to protect themselves. I don't want
Mhm.
my child to learn how to have effective and meaningful, not conversations, but relationships. So I think it takes multiple ways to engage parents. Um, but to reach the children, it may take, some passive consent in some ways that you weave in sex ed and content that it wouldn't necessarily be in. We used to talk about teaching against the curriculum, especially in school. So like, can you have these conversations if you're not using OWL? Like I'm thinking about a K-12 teacher
Right. Mhm.
in math, in English, in social studies, whatever the other core curriculum courses are, we can actually bring in some of that conversation and content around healthy relationships, around bullying, around consent. All of that can be included.
I was called into a private school about 10 years ago to help them create a policy around sexual behavior. And when they brought me in, they said, "Yeah, we're tired of opening the cupboards and finding kids making out in the cupboards." I'm like, "Okay."
Hmm.
So I surveyed the students and I surveyed the faculty, and when we wrote a policy that everybody agreed was going to be workable, then I had the task of introducing it to the faculty, and one of the activities that I created was um, because they were, there was a physics teacher, a math teacher, a English lit teacher, a religion teacher, the whole thing. I had each of them think about a way that they could talk about sexuality appropriately within their course content. And it was so exciting to see how they could do that because, like, the teacher who taught English Lit said, well, we could talk about Romeo and Juliet and how that whole setup was unhealthy. And then the math teacher said, well, I could easily talk about kind of like that STI activity in Our Whole Lives, the statistics on if you're protected or if you're not protected. So that was great. The PE teacher talked about, healthy, the health stuff and protecting yourself against unintended pregnancies and STIs, because it's always the gym teacher, right, in those schools. The only teacher that didn't come up with anything was the physics professor, and she's just knitting away, saying, there's nothing. And I'm like, well, bodies in motion, right? You could probably figure out some way to talk about bodies in motion, but everybody else was, I think uh, we have to create ways that people who aren't sex educators can see themselves as adding value to those conversations, even just about consent. I mean, not just about consent, but any teacher, any person who's in a church or any kind of community can find ways to have those those conversations. I'm reminded of your t-shirt. What is your I know your t-shirt today says sweet tea and sex positivity, but you also have one that says college.
And comprehensive sex ed. This is so sad.
But
It's young you.
you also have one that says collards and consent, right?
Collars, condoms, and consent.
There
Yeah,
you go. There you there you go.
like collars. Don't say in the chat.
I'm just gonna check to see what oh, somebody wants to know where to get your sweet tea t-shirt, Tanya.
It will be back in, well, we're already in the fall, but sometime near the end of the month when we hopefully have our conference. It's out of stock now, which is good.
Somebody else says, okay, it's a question about what we're doing at the UUA to invest in sex ed in the South. Yeah. Well, funding is always an issue. We are supporting it by offering programs like this, by encouraging community collaboration. And we have our organizing strategy team that has very good resources for building relationships in the community. If you look at the General Assembly for this year, for the recorded webinars, we did one, Amy and I did one with the organizing strategy team from the UUA about how to use their get out the vote techniques to build relationships in communities that will be collaborative in terms of offering our whole lives. And that's, I think, going to be the ticket for solving issues where the law is clamping down and not allowing school-based sex ed. We're going to get there by continuing to offer it in churches and congregations and collaborative programming. Um, so that's where we stand on that. There was another question about when we offer the spring trainings. So folks, the UUA and the UCC only plan the online trainings, and those will be going up fairly soon. The first one will be in February. The in-person trainings, we don't control those. So as people provide details to us about their trainings, they go immediately up on the UCC and UUA calendars. So that is not a knowable thing for me. Okay, so let's get back to when you're in a situation where you're working in the South, and I'm sure that that has some translatable effects to other states in the South. How are you recommending that people ensure that uh, youth and young adults and children who are socially marginalized are being included in sex ed programs? If you're not allowed to say LGBTQIA plus, how do you make kids feel safe?
I think for me, now I am now teaching on the college level specifically when you ask me like that. We still talk about, like, we follow our textbook, and I think that's where a little bit of that helps. And then well, even in community, because now I'm thinking about before school started, it's almost like it's a trick, it's a game. I may not say things, but you might, and you might ask questions. So
Mm.
I may answer a question, but I may not teach the topic. Does that make sense?
It
So,
does.
and hopefully this won't cause any problems later and because it's recorded, but like ultimately my presentation is going to be vetted and viewed and approved. But as a participant who has a question, I have the knowledge and information to answer the question. And I've been in space where there've been like consultants um from different organizations, funding organizations in the room, and I'm like, I'm gonna answer the question. Is that okay? It's like, yeah. And it's weird because you can answer a participant question, but you can't necessarily have information in your slides.
It's so tricky. So I'm curious about, like, I know when I have taught in universities, I've had an adjunct office, and I could put my safe space stickers on the door and whatnot, but can you do that?
I mean, we haven't taken any stickers down or things out the window, but we haven't added anything new. So I can say one of these universities that I'm associated with, we had an LGBTQ center. We're very proud of that. But we no longer have, it's not called that anymore. So I'm not sure how safe or comfortable students feel because it's not explicit as to what resources are available to them. We had bracelets. I was looking around because I thought I had one, but the bracelets were like so many identities, like queer, black, LGBTQ, maybe lesbian. Like it might have been like specific because I only had a few of them. And it's like now no one can use those bracelets. Like you can't get, well, the or the entity, the organization or the department on campus can't give it out, but a student org could give it out potentially.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah. We have a question that said, do you have any tips for how to reach parents in the community? And should those of us that teach comprehensive sex ed in the community, is it worth trying to collaborate with public schools or rather just focus on charter and private schools, given the North Carolina restrictions on discussions around gender and sex and overall limitations on offering comprehensive sex ed?
Yeah, I think now most charter schools, if I'm not mistaken, they still have to follow the curriculum, but they may not. So they have to be careful too in saying and answering this question because they follow the guidelines and the content of the state standards and expectations. I will say that. But I will say I wouldn't give up on public schools because every school district, it like you've gone to one school district, you've gone to one school district. We have 115. So there's some in that 115 who are still making sure that comprehensive sex ed, as best as they can apply it, is being taught. So I'm encouraged by that. But I will say some if and that's the thing, like even with the federal guidelines and then local control, the idea is that there's very few parents, like usually it's the loudest person who's causing more of the ruckus. And that, but you need that parent voice. So you need
Right.
more of the parents who are in favor of what you're doing to be more vocal than the ones who are not, because it's only usually a handful of those. And what I found in North Carolina, which has been sadly effective, is that a lot of the voices that are the loudest don't have about public school stuff in particular, don't have children. The parents don't have children in public schools. And y'all, this is the thing, y'all, Southern. Um, there are people who don't even live in North Carolina speaking out
Mm.
about what's happening in North Carolina as a parent. Okay. Like the
Yeah, like the Moms for Liberty folks, and yeah, they're stepping out of their geographic zone to achieve a point. I'm putting in the chat the name of Dr. Elizabeth Schroeder.
Hmm.
Elizabeth is a consultant. She's done a lot of work with school boards. So if there are folks listening to this who, and I'm not, she doesn't know I'm putting that link in there,
Oh, but I
but she does fabulous work. And if you needed a consultant to help in with your dealing with your local schools or school boards, I think that she would be a good place to start because that's one of her specialties.
Yeah, and I think the only difference now that we're navigating is not only are we navigating local pushback, we're looking at potential funding implications for schools and
Right.
states. So I'm more curious to know what her strategy or thoughts are now because it's bigger a little bit. It's a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I mean, we were before we went on air, we were talking about your sexual health conference, and a lot of folks are able to attend that because they have funding to do so. Yeah, I assume that affects like the National Sex Ed conference that happens in this coming year. It's in February. You know that a lot of people who are working with schools, their budgets are cut back for sex ed. Yeah, that's a challenge. Um, so it do you because you're in a kind of unique space because you're familiar with OWL, you're trained facilitators, you've been doing that for a year now. And you also work in the secular setting. How would you relate OWL's capacity to kind of bridge some of the gaps that can happen with a school sex education changing?
People want it. Like, I know in North Carolina when we talk about it, and I just had a student, support, one of the trainers, and man, let me tell you, people would like, "Why don't we have this? Why don't we" like but the thing is, like you said earlier, OWL takes funding, right? And so, if I'm not able as far as I know, and I could be wrong, OWL's not on one of the evidence-based lists for.
Well, so we are OWL is evidence informed because it addresses the CECAS guidelines and the newer national sex ed standards for grades K-12. But we have not yet had, in order to get that evidence based, you have to have research
Rigorous
conducted on
research.
it.
And that sucks. Like we were moving towards the space of utilizing evidence informed best practices. And so with some of the schools and then some of the organizations I know at least in North Carolina, South Carolina, and maybe even Georgia, that if they're not on this list of things, then you can't do it. But people are very much interested. We talked about it at one of our community trainings. So I'm originally from Brooklyn, shout out, but I'm a Southerner, and I moved to Eastern North Carolina, and we did a training in Eastern North Carolina, and I don't know, somehow we started talking about Al, and they were like, "Well, how do we get it?" Like, and that was when I remembered someone. I was like, well, you can, but it won't be through this way. Like, it won't be through this particular community. So I know that there's interest. I know that part of North Carolina is it's a tough cookie. We're glad to be doing so. I had my first SAR in North Carolina, in Eastern North Carolina, like a year and a half ago.
So
Like,
as for folks who aren't familiar with that acronym, a
oh, yeah,
SAR is
sorry.
a sexual attitude reassessment. And it's a way that when we do OWL facilitator trainings, one of the things is we give people practice answering questions in hopes that they will become, as we say, unshockable, meaning there's no question that you're going to be too embarrassed to answer, you or your co-facilitator, or, and you'd have a week, to look up an answer and practice answering it. But also we don't want anyone asking a question even within a workshop
Yeah,
and having a facilitator go, "Oh, really? That's icky. Why would anyone do that?"
yeah,
So a SAR exposes people to ways of being, whether they're specific sexual communities or age groups or populations. Um, And it's a really good idea for sexuality educators to take a SAR.
It is.
Yeah.
But doing that in Eastern North Carolina, where I grew up, or at least where I went to middle and high school, first of all, it was a dream come true. Secondly, the receptiveness of the participants. I'm like, okay, so we know how challenging it is, but we see that people want this and are open to doing it. So here we are. Uh,
Yeah.
it was
It's there was a question about are we moving toward getting the research done? And I will say that the the weird thing about research is that the people being researched often have to pay for it. In a kind of roundabout way, because you don't want to look like you're getting the answers you want
yeah,
because you're paying for the research. Amy and I have interviewed researchers from various institutions there that we know who we want to do it. We just need the funding to help them do it.
yeah,
One of the problems is that very often for public health, the measures of whether a program is effective
yeah. Hmm.
are did these kids not have sex? Like did you delay sexual onset?
Yeah.
Did you get it down to zero, the number of kids or youth who had STIs? Do they know more facts than they did before? Well, of course you want that.
Right.
But we also, a huge part of OWL is, are they good people? Are they looking out for others? Are they making decisions based on consent and values? Are they destigmatizing? Are they, we don't want bullies. We don't want people who make
Right.
fun of people who are different or making different choices. We also don't want to say that our measure of success is delayed sexual debut because so many people don't have control over that. They are coerced into having sex. And then if your culture is telling you, well, you're trash because you had sex when you were 12, well, that doesn't help a child who was assaulted, right? So our measures of success are sometimes different than what public health researchers are looking for. So when we were interviewing folks who might want to research OWL, it was very important that they get that our measures of success are about decision making and kindness and consent and whatnot.
Dr. Davis, I think what is really relevant about what you said is that that's the key around sexuality education as a whole in general. It's not just don't do this, do this. It's life skills in general. It's about social justice. It's about kindness, caring for yourself, being I can't even think of the word, empathetic, right?
Hmm.
Like, and that's, I think that's part of the change I hope to see in the future, knock on wood, is that, that list of evidence-based interventions are solely about prevention.
Right.
And even with that, it doesn't necessarily build the skills. Like, I might have prevented this or used a condom, but did I learn how to be respectful? Did I learn how to honor my relationships, or all the other things that come with going and just being a nice human being, or
Right.
healthy and whole human being our whole lives? Like, that's what I always think about, like that that's actually not there in many cases.
Right. Yeah. And that when the focus is on don't do that, then that leads to stigma and shame.
Yep.
Because if you've made a different choice or you've had that option taken away from you to make that choice, then you're left with I was a failure, as opposed to the comprehensive approach and it's not just OWL. There are other really good comprehensive sex ed
Oh,
programs out there.
yeah.
But trying to take away that stigma and shame is so important to the work that we are doing. I'm wondering if you have any words of hope for folks, it's so easy in this current, and I say current intentionally because I do hope for change. Um, but it can be hard and distressing to be wanting to create sexually healthy programming in a climate where people's rights are being taken away, their identities are being dismissed and condoned. Um, like I said, we can't even trust the CDC anymore for sexual health information. So where do you see hope?
Part of my hope has come from the creativity and the commitment of all of us. Like, just the idea of having to reframe things for the sake of implementation, but still making sure that we're sticking true to what the facts are. That's a part of my hope. The other hope that I have is actually in our young people. Um, I remember my instructors back in the day looking at me and my classmates are like, "We're counting on y'all." And I'm like, "Oh God, that's so much pressure." But then I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do some things." And I feel like my generation was able to accomplish a few things. But now when I look at the younger, like I had this conversation yesterday. Side note, y'all, I went to a funeral of one of my college classmates, and her cousin's daughter, who I only remember from being 4 years old, is now a student at one of the universities here. And she's talking to me about, now she is 19. And I wanted just to take her and just, I don't know what I want to just like do something to her, hug her. Um, and she's talking to me about her profession in early childhood and why it was important and what was happening in the political climate, and not giving up because she knew she was destined to do this work and the ways in which she's going to do it and what her future might hold. And I thought I was talking to like a 40-year-old maybe. And not, this isn't ages. It's just it made me feel so good to say like you are so attuned and so aware that I feel like I wish I were that student at 19. Like, I was just like, I just need to get a degree so my mama won't be mad at me. But, it was so refreshing to hear her. And I know other students like her who are really paying attention to what's going on in society. They're having conversations with their parents and they're also having conversations with each other. And they're able to organize and strategize in a way that we, at least my generation, we started, but we couldn't expand. We
Mhm.
a little bit of revolting and advocacy, but I see them doing so much bigger. So that's really where my hope is, that we continue to nurture the, I don't know if they're X, Z, Y, I always forget, but whoever
I can't keep track of them.
alpha, because
Yeah.
that generation that's behind them is going to rely and look on them, look to them just like her generation looked to us.
Yeah, and I think there are also, I thank you for that because it, it is important to maintain hope. I think that's our strongest weapon in this effort to keep providing sexuality education and promoting it. I have also great confidence in the communities that queer communities and trans communities, and there are communities of people who are supporting people who need reproductive care and might need to travel for that, and that those communities will only get stronger because they need to, they need the resilience. Resilience for there have been communities providing this kind of support for each other for eons, and they're still at it. They're still doing the work. And that's really important as well, that we not discount the work that has been done. Especially, Black women have been working in reproductive justice work forever, and so that there are lessons that we can learn from folks who have already been doing this work, and that that is also a source of strength, I think. And I think also the fact that even though there are lots of people who use Our Whole Lives in secular settings, the fact that the UCC and UUA are so committed to Our Whole Lives is also a source of strength for me, and I know for Amy as well. At UCC Synod, the UCC passed referendum, I think it was called, supporting its ongoing commitment to Our Whole Lives, and that is really exciting. We have a relationship with the United Methodist Church now, that they have Our Whole Lives is recognized in their Book of Discipline, meaning that that's like tacit approval to, like, if you're going to use sex ed, here's the one to use. And we're in conversations with them about how to really move that forward. That's really exciting to me, that there's another faith community that is really interested in Our Whole Lives. And of course, any faith community that shares the OWL values is welcome, to use Our Whole Lives.
And then you just made me think about another space where my hope, oh, I was getting a little churchy, my hope is built, but my hope is resting in is the faith community. Because again, although I know there are some ideologies and theology and values that may not align with having open conversations about sex and sexuality and being inclusive, etc. I know I've seen a shift in the ways faith communities are teaching, approaching, and embracing um, these conversations and individuals who aren't necessarily the typical congregant or some,
Mm-hmm.
member. And so that's another place where through growth, that whole worldview shift is really important. And understanding theological principles from a way that is inclusive. At least I'm also speaking from my own denominational perspective, but
Right.
um, while there are some, what do you call, I guess, left to right, if you use those terminologies, there's a lot more growth in the middle.
That's really good to hear. I know we are we are contacted periodically through different faith communities in other countries, also here. And one of the nice things about Our Whole Lives is that it is adaptable. So not only, you can use Our Whole Lives on its own, or you can use it with the UCC or UU faith materials, or other faith communities can create their own faith supplements. And if there's, of course, we want everyone to use it the way it's written.
Yeah, yeah,
But if people want to adapt it or need to for their population, they can do that. They just can't call it Our Whole Lives.
yeah.
So that's the important thing there. We're getting to the end of our time here. I want to thank you, Tanya, for being with us. That's tanyambass.com if you want to visit Tanya's website. Andrea, thank you for your technical support today. Our program next month, November 5th, will feature Dan Long talking about how to create inclusive Our Whole Lives programs. We're taking December off because that's when we do, I'll be seeing Tanya. That's when we do our mandatory professional development for our OWL trainings. So thank you all for joining us today, and look for a follow-up email. You can have a recording of today's program as well as the links that we shared. Thank you. Thank you very much. Take care, Dr. Bass.